Hello, this is Nikki from the Pigeon Letters design team, and today we are going to be painting magnolias, white magnolias. Super beautiful flower, and it's the middle of March here and they're just starting to bloom. So I thought it would be a perfect tutorial. I am working on a really big canvas. This is a size 10 inch by 14 inch. You do not have to work that big. Feel free to work at whatever size you want, but this is the watercolor block I had available today. We are going to be using a watercolor block, watercolor paint. You're gonna need a pencil because we're gonna sketch everything out first. And then I'm gonna be using various sizes of the pigeon letter brushes. So I'm probably gonna be going all the way up to about a 10. Maybe use the flat brush as well because we're gonna be totally painting the background. So you definitely want a couple different sizes of brushes. And if you're working as big as I am, you definitely need some larger brushes. The first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna start on the left corner and just draw a circle because we're roughly sketching out where the flowers are gonna be. I'm gonna put another one like down here, and then maybe one over here that's like just starting to bloom. So we'll start with this one, and magnolias have this kind of big stamen in the center. I think that's what it's called. And then all of the leaves that come out around it. I'm gonna start off with just those small leaves. And you wanna do kind of like a half circle or a half oval, but I'm going to leave take the petal in a little bit so there's some interest to it. And I'm gonna do that with all of them. And this flower is gonna be completely open, but it's almost, some of the petals are gonna scoop up a little bit. So for example, here's one that's gonna scoop up. So I'm gonna draw it out like this, and then like this, and make that scoop at the bottom where you can see the petal. But the petal folds over a little bit, so this is gonna be that lip of the petal. We're gonna do that over here as well. This one's gonna be slightly shorter, and it's gonna have that little dip in the petal, just like this has a dip up here. And something important to do is you wanna make your petals cross over a little bit, just because obviously this first layer of petals, there's the first layer and then the ones behind it. The first layer doesn't need to cross over, but when we get behind it, they will be crossing over. So this is a petal in the back, and again, it's like scooping around, and we have that lip here. When you draw flowers, you really want to make sure that you have some movement in your flowers. Otherwise, they just get really boring, and no flower is just a perfect shaped petal all the way around. We have another petal back here. It's gonna come up, and again, it has that lip coming up where it kind of folds over. And there's a little petal back here. And then again, we're gonna have more of these scooping petals, but it's gonna come out further. So basically draw two lines and then kind of box it out here with a dome shape. And then we make just these little petals coming out like that. All right, our last petal is just coming behind here, and make a little lip on that as well. Now don't worry if your pencil lines are kind of dark. We are going to be painting the background today. So you don't want them to be crazy dark, because when we come in here, it is going to be white still. So I'm drawing darker so you guys can see it, but don't worry about your outside petals being darker, but you do want the inside ones to be a little lighter. We can work on the details here when we start painting, but I want to put some leaves in. So I'm just coming over here and kind of following that same shape. We have a bigger leaf over here, and that leaf is gonna have a little lip coming up as well, and then you can put a line down the middle of these leaves. And we'll do another one, a line down the middle. And then this one is kind of short and fat. And then our last one will come up like this. All right, so we have that. Now the thing with the magnolias is they have this kind of really thick woody stem. So make that thick woody stem. And then we're gonna do another flower right here. Okay, for this flower, I want it to be a side angle. The center, we're gonna have that large center piece. And then everything is going to go around it, but it's more to the side. So our most furthest leaf to the bottom is gonna be just, we're basically seeing the back side of it. So a half circle, and then just scoop it around. And then we're gonna do a little one like that right next to it. Then we are going to make some other petals over here, and they're gonna have a little lip coming up as well. Again, I'm drawing darker so you guys can see me, but you don't need to draw this dark. The same petal over here, I'm now gonna make it over here. And you're gonna see where it connects a little bit. So just put a little line right here where it connects. Have another petal coming up. And again, this petal has that lip. Another petal, and then another one back here. And let's do another petal and have it fold over kind of there. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. And again, magnolias have a lot of leaves, so just adding in some of those leaves here. Maybe one coming down here. We don't have to overdo it. Definitely gonna have to come in here with an eraser though, soon. Okay, so now we have this flower, and then we're gonna do one more flower here. All right, our last flower is going to be a side view again, but we're gonna switch directions. So start with your stamen in the middle, kind of like gumdrop, pointy gumdrop shape. Then I want to do a petal where you're only seeing the side of it, like the front of it. So a C curve, and then just almost like that little bow and a lip, like that. Then we're gonna come up to the side over here and make, everything is gonna curve in like this. A petal over here with a big lip coming out. We're gonna have another little petal right here. Same thing, you're gonna do that lip on the petal. Over here, you're gonna basically mirror it, but just make little slight variations so it doesn't look exactly the same. Then again, pull out this big petal, make the lip smaller. Same thing, another big petal, make a little lip. There we go. And we're gonna cross over the stem a little bit, which is good because we didn't want it to be all open right there. Perfect, and then I'll just put one more petal back here so it looks layered. Okay, now what I wanna do is make a stem coming out of here. And I'm gonna do another leaf to cover up where this stem would go. So we'll make green right there. And then I'll make a leaf coming out here. Again, those magnolia leaves are long and they have the line in the middle. I'll make another leaf over here. Maybe a little one over here. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. I want to do a magnolia bud just to make it a little more interesting. So I'm making a stem come out over here and then just a long kind of oval shape. And then just put a couple petal lines in there. It doesn't have to be crazy or anything. And just make a couple little leaves. Lots of leaves in this painting. Okay, beautiful. So we have completely sketched out everything. And if your pencil lines look pretty dark, just take an eraser. since we're working on watercolor paper, I recommend using a gum eraser and just lightly press down and it'll pull up those extra pencil marks. Don't worry about it too much on the leaves, but the petals are going to be white. And we want to make sure that we're not seeing our pencil lines too much in that. So just lightly press down. All right, now we can start painting the background first. Now we need to get started with painting our background. And like I said before, I really went to town with how big this painting is. So I'm gonna use a pretty big brush. I'm gonna start off with a size 10, but I'm probably gonna have to use one of these filbert brushes as well. So mix up a green. I want this to feel really springy. So I'm gonna mix up a pretty, not like overly bright green, but I would say a springy colored green. So I'm using sap green right here, and I'm definitely going to be adding some yellow and then a little bit of this. I think this is, I can't remember what the name of this color is. It's almost an emerald color. So I'm gonna mix that up real quick and I'm gonna speed this up. Okay, now that you have your green all mixed up, you're going to go around and outline. We're gonna paint the entire background. You want your paint to be pretty thick. I would say this is about the texture of butter. And the reason that I want it thick is because I want this to be pretty saturated. I don't want it to be too watery in the background. If you have something like gouache, gouache would work really, really well here. I don't have a green gouache, otherwise I would pull it out right now. And a secret to when you're doing a background like this is you want to make sure that you are keeping your paint wet. So as I outline here, I can leave it like that for a couple seconds, but I have to make sure that I don't let it dry, because once it dries, it's not going to blend. Then I just come in here with water and I move it around. And there are some lighter areas because I am working with watercolor and I'm okay with the variation in those places. So I'm just going through, and you can always grab a little darker green too. Just keep in mind that our leaves are also going to be green, but we're gonna make them slightly an olive green tone with brown, which is indicative of the magnolia leaves. But you don't want to do the exact same color because then, you know, it'll be confusing. Okay, so we're painting all of this. Make sure you get all the spots that are in the background. I really like this brush from the Pigeon Litters because the tip is really pointy, and you need a pointy tip when you're going in here. And it's nice because it's size 10, but I still have the tip pretty pointy. Now, you guys are probably working on a lot smaller paper than I am, so I'm gonna go ahead and speed this up just so I can be at the same time frame as you, and this tutorial doesn't end up taking like 3 hours. Okay, so we have to make sure that we got everything, and I can see right here, I forgot to get this little space. So make sure you get all of the background. Sometimes it's hard to remember where everything is. In the end though, you can always just add an extra leaf if you notice, or you can come back in and paint it. It's not my preferred method, but if you have to, you have to. All right, we have our entire background painted, and as you can see, the cool thing about painting your background like this is that the white really stands out. The white of our petals will be really vibrant because we painted this whole background, but we can't really get in here and get started with everything else until we let the background dry. So we're gonna let the background dry and then we're gonna come back. We are back at our painting. And what I want to do is Magnolia leaves, the center line right here is kind of a greenish color, like a greenish yellow. So what I want to do is I want to paint all of our leaves that greenish yellow hue. And then what we're going to do is we're going to come back and paint around that so it'll leave that line in the middle. So mix up a yellowy green, something maybe that has a little bit of brown in it, so it's not super green, but not super brown either. Some yellow. Okay, and then just put a really light wash of that color on every single leaf. This can be really meditative. It almost, when you're at this phase in your painting, it feels like one of those paint by the number coloring books. So you want it to be, this one's pretty light, but it's okay. You can have some variation. You want it to show up. You don't want it to look white. We are going to be making these leaves a lot darker, but I wanted to have that light line down the middle because it's really a Magnolia leaves thing to have that. And I think it's important that we include that in our painting. Sometimes the tiniest details in your watercolor painting are really what make it pop or make somebody feel that it looks realistic or that it's more interesting to look at. I know sometimes we tend to just look at the big picture and not focus in on the smaller details, but those small details can be what really make your painting. So I'm going around and I'm painting all of these Magnolia leaves this color. Of course, you can vary your shade, you can vary your saturation. All this is gonna do is it's putting down a base layer and it's allowing us to have that line down the middle without having to try to paint around that line. So just paint all of your leaves. Again, I am going to speed this up. Feel free to pause it if you wanna, if you're still painting. I know that my painting is gigantic, so I'm gonna go ahead and speed this up real quick. Now that we have all of our base layer of our leaves painted, let's move on to the center of those Magnolia flowers. I'm gonna grab my size 4 brush, but grab whatever brush makes sense for you for what size your painting is. And I'm mixing up a yellow. I don't want a yellow that is too bright. I wanna make it a little mild, because that's the base color that you'll start with. So I added a little bit of purple into this, kind of just muted it down. You can add black as well. And then I'm just going to paint that little gumdrop center with the yellow. It's almost kind of a beigey color. There's many different kinds of magnolias, and some of them have darker centers. I know the pink magnolia has a dark center, and some of them have the really light centers. I think, is it a Georgia magnolia has a really light center? This is kind of a hybrid. I'm not looking at a photo, so we are just kind of winging it here. Okay, the last thing we're gonna do for the base layer is mix up a brown, kind of a muted down brown. You don't want it too red, and you want it light, and just paint that stem, the base layer of the stem. So we have that down, and there's no confusion that this is a stem. And be careful that you're painting in the lines. If you start to paint over too much, it's gonna affect your painting and make that background look a little funky. I don't want that. There's not too many stems here. And if your leaves are still super, super wet, just be careful. If they're not dry yet, just wait until they dry before you paint around it. All right, that looks fantastic. Now we need to let all of this dry and we can come back and paint another layer. We are back to our painting, and now that these leaves are dry, it's time to come in and paint around that center mark. Since I have a pencil line here that's pretty dark, I'm actually going to paint right along that line and then leave a space above it. That way you're not seeing the pencil mark come through down the middle. I'm gonna mix up a color that is similar to Magnolia leaves. Magnolia leaves have this olive tone to their leaves. So it's not quite bright green. It is definitely has some yellow and brown hues in it. So feel free to mix up a color like that. I'm gonna mix this up real quick and move this because I don't want to splash that. The colors I'm using here are, I have a sap green in here. I'm using yellow ochre to get it to be more of that olive tone. You can also add a tiny bit of red in. That should help it get a little more olivey. If it's too much, just add in more green. I think this is Hooker's green over here. I really need to label my palette because it's not labeled. You want to mix up two colors that are slightly different but similar in shade. The reason you want to do this is because we are going to be dropping in color. We're going to use the wet on wet technique. We're going to paint and then we're going to drop in little pops of color. That way we're not having to layer multiple times. We're only having to do it twice because we're going to use this technique of dropping in a different tone. I'm just about to show you guys that. All right, we have our paint ready to go. Make sure you mix up enough paint. That was something that I learned I was doing wrong, was that I would never mix up enough paint, and then I would have to mix it up again and it would be really hard to get the same color. Grabbing that green color, I'm gonna show you guys on this leaf right here, and again, it's gonna be the same technique on all the leaves, but I'll show you all of these ones. I'm grabbing my color and make sure you never wanna have so much water on your brush that your brush is dripping. Just lightly tap it on a paper towel if that is the issue. Now I'm going to come up against that line and I'm just gonna outline this. I'm gonna rinse off my brush and grab just water and move it around. Not too much water. And perfect. Then I'm gonna come up to here and I'm gonna leave a line right here. So the tip of your brush, draw a line right next to that line, but leave that space open. And the same thing you just did on that bottom leaf. Grab water and just blend it in. Okay, this is all wet right now. So a wet on wet technique, we're gonna grab that darker shade that we created and I'm going to just tap it in different locations. So maybe a little down here, maybe up here. I'm also going to make a color that is a lot more brown, still green, but a lot more brown. And I'm also going to just tap that in. Now when this dries, it'll look really cool. If you have anything that just looks too spotty to you right now, rinse your brush off, then lightly tap it on a paper towel and you can move it around. But sometimes you'd be really surprised at how things dry. That's our first leaf. Now we're going to do that basic technique, on all of these leaves. But I want to tell you it's important to vary your colors. For example, this leaf is really low and it's underneath a lot of stuff. I'm going to make this leaf darker than that leaf was, but still making sure to leave my little line down the middle. And make sure you get, because we want to make those white petals pop out. Make sure you bring that green all the way in. Then I'm just gonna move it around. Same thing over here. So it's important that you use the same shades, but you can vary their saturation and you can make them vary slightly in color. For example, how that yellow was here, to bring interest to your painting, but to still make it feel cohesive. So now I'm gonna add an even darker saturation in here, because this is probably the petals would create a pretty deep shadow here. And I want that to be pronounced. Just lightly poking in that darker color, and because this is all wet, it'll bleed really nicely. Great. I'm going to go around and paint all of my leaves, and then we will meet back and we'll start on our beautiful flowers. One thing I do want to mention, if you ever go too far in your painting and you feel like, oh, that's way too saturated, just rinse off your brush, lightly dry it off on your paper towel, and then you can come and pull up the paint, and it essentially pulls a highlight into your painting. So have no fear, you can definitely pull up some paint if you need to. All right, you guys, we're finishing up our last leaf here. And something that I want to mention is just be really careful that your leaves aren't wet if they're next to each other. For example, this leaf is probably not quite dry. And if I paint on here, it's gonna start bleeding a little bit. I'm okay with that for this painting, but typically, you don't want your colors to bleed unless you're doing a loose style painting. And this isn't really a loose style, but I'm okay with like a little bit of that. And so you can leave it just like this, your leaves, or you can come in and you could do that same process again. And that's called layering. So we did layer slightly because we had our base layer, but if you really want to just increase the different colors and the different saturations, you can go ahead and add another layer. But for this little tutorial, I'm not gonna go too far down the layer hole. So, all right, our leaves are all done, and now we're gonna let this completely dry, and we're going to get into those lovely petals. Now we are moving on to our petals. And remember what I said earlier, you wanna make sure that your pencil lines are not too dark, because the flower is going to remain white for the most part. If they are looking too dark, just lightly take a gum eraser and pull up some of those pencil marks. We're going to mix up a color that kind of a grayish tone, super, super, super light gray, because that is going to be our shadows. I'm actually taking a little bit of blue in with this green, and I might add just a touch of black. You could also add red, which is an opposing color. You want a very light, watered down, grayish tone. Now, when you're working with shadows, you never just want to do gray, flat out gray, or flat out black, because it just doesn't look natural. If you really squint your eyes, if you're looking at a picture of a flower or a magnolia, you can see that there's probably some yellow tones in there and some blue tones. Okay, I'm gonna darken this up just slightly, because I don't want it to be green. So it should be gray, but a gray that looks a little greenish. Okay. Now I'm taking a smaller brush here. I'm gonna use my size 2 brush. And I am going to get situated. coming in with my watercolor paint that's really watered down, I'm coming under this first petal. If we're looking at a flower, the darkest petals are going to be underneath, right? Because they're getting the least amount of light. I'm just making a line here. And also this petal folds over. This part would be really white. I'm going to make another line right next to it. Make sure your paint is not too dry. It should be pretty wet. Then rinse off your brush and get just water and lightly blend it in around that petal. And what you want to create is depth in your painting. The more you do this, the more depth you're going to see. We are going to work on this flower together, and then I'll let you guys work on these other ones yourself. But I'm going to give you those techniques so you know what to do. And we are going to be alternating the tone for some of these shadows to be a little darker. Add a little bit of more black, or if you're using a really dark blue, to your gray that you have. And just poke it in here lightly. And since it's already wet, it's going to bleed a little bit. And you can always just bring in a little darker shadow if you want. You can also achieve this look by coming back once it's dry and then using the same technique that we just used. Now we're going to go to our next petal. And the one under here, I'm going to outline this petal that's turned up on the bottom. And then again, we have this part of the petal that is turned up. I'm going to make a line next to it. Rinse off my brush, get just water, and come in here and blend it in. So that bottom petal is going to get a darker tone to it, like it's a shadow. This petal does need to be darker a little bit, right? Because we have this part of the petal that's folded over. And if you looked at this in real life, this area would appear in shadow a little bit compared to this. But we're gonna wait to do that until this dries. Otherwise, this is gonna bleed into that, and we do not want that. Let's move on to our next petal. We're gonna do the same thing over here. So just kind of outlining next to where the petal curves up. Then grabbing just water and blending. So essentially, we're just painting these lower ones a grayish tone. Or if you chose to make yours a little more blue or a little more yellow. And I am going to grab just slightly darker. And right here, I'm just gonna pop in a little darker color where it really curls down. And maybe up here too. And you can help it along if it's not bleeding as much as you want it to. You can also rinse off your brush and dry it off and pull up some of the paint if it gets too dark. Moving on to our petal right here. I can see that I have a little mistake from my background, but we're just gonna pretend like that's a tear in the petal. Same thing, outlining this upper leaf right on the edge. Make sure getting all the way in here, rinsing off my brush, and then just moving that paint around, all the way around, because I really want to emphasize that these top petals are going to be lighter, not like a crazy amount lighter, but lighter. Since this petal is next to this one that's wet, we're going to skip it and we're going to work on this one. Also, feel free to alternate your color slightly. If you're thinking it's looking really flat, you can add a little more blue or green or whatever you're doing to the gray. I'm just outlining here. This one I did a little bit darker because I don't want them all to look exactly the same. And then for the most part, I'm leaving this upper area white. I don't want it to be too dark because it's going to be touching the light more as well. Put a little more dark shade down here. I think this could use a little darkness down here. or darker paint. All the way around that. Okay. Now what I want to do is come in to where the center area is, because there would be a shadow underneath here. I'm gonna grab that same color, maybe just slightly darker, and just put a little bit of paint. Rinse off my brush and get just water. My water is never dripping off my brush, okay? Then just lightly blending it. I'm using a scrubbing motion, almost like brushing your teeth a little bit, just to show that there would be a shadow. Same thing right here. Not too crazy, just a little bit. And we are going to need to show that there's a slight shadow where that lip is. Gonna just outline there. Rinse off my brush and just move that paint. For something like this, you can make it as detailed or as little detailed as you want. This would be my first layer, and I would honestly probably come in here and do this about 7 more times. I know that seems crazy, but I like to have really detailed artwork where the depth looks really deep. For this tutorial, I'll just be showing you guys, the basics to adding some detail this way. But if you want to keep playing with it, you can let it dry and then put layer upon layer upon layer. We are going to come back here once this is dry and add just some tiny details that are quite a bit darker to really make it pop. But like I said, it's all about how much time you want to spend on this. You could spend a ton of time, or you can spend not a ton of time. I'm gonna put a little darker shadow right here because I feel like it needs it. I'm just blending. The key is to blend so it looks soft, like a soft edge, and that the light is diffusing. And this one's dry. We can come back over here and add in that shadow. And since this petal is actually like 3rd petal deep, it can be even darker. Not too dark, but we want to make sure that we are showing depth by how saturated that shadow color is. Okay, so go ahead and paint the shadows on your other flowers. And then once we've painted these ones, this one will be dry, and we can come back and put in those final shadow details, as well as painting the stamen. I really hope that's the right name, in the back. Oh, you know what I just saw? This petal back here was not painted. So grab that darker color. Same thing, you're just outlining that area and then adding clean water to move it along. And since this petal is 3 deep, it's gonna be slightly darker. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and do the shadows for all of these other all these other flowers. We've made it to the final stage, and in this stage, we are going to be adding slightly darker shadows, but they're going to be quick shadows because they're not going to be on every single petal. We're going to do the stems here, as well as just adding a little detail here to the stamens. Grab that same color that you used for the shadow, but make it slightly darker. You can either add in a little dark blue and a little red, or you can add in just black. And once you have that, look at the flower. You can actually look at a real magnolia flower too. And if you squint your eyes, you'll see where the darkest shadows are. So I know already that there's going to be a pretty dark shadow here. So I'm just gonna make a little line. There's gonna be a pretty dark shadow here, a darker shadow under here, and my paint's really wet, so I'm not afraid that it's gonna dry, and a darker shadow here. Then I'm gonna rinse off my brush and I'm just gonna blend it in slightly. And make sure you're rinsing off your brush in between each one. And same thing over here. Okay. Just want to make sure that we bring in some of those darker shadows. And then back here, this one would be darker as well because it's all the way in the back. And then one more that I see is right here. So I guess we did more than a couple. Okay. All right. And if you want, you could also add them like here. See, it's really easy for me to just get carried away here, so I'll stop. But just have them slightly darker. If you guys want to come back in and add more, you can. Like, I definitely see some areas where there could be more shadows. Okay. Right here too. I just can't help myself. Okay, we have those. And then same thing for these other flowers. So right here, it's gonna be darker. This definitely, because these are, the petals down here are more cupped and they would produce a heavier shadow, especially around that center area. Same thing on this one. Again, I'm just rinsing off my brush to blend this in and grabbing just water. Layering really helps you. I really think that layering is a way to make your artwork stand out more. And I know some people don't layer, they do a loose style, but if you do like something that maybe looks slightly more realistic or really draws your eye in, layering is definitely for you. There are beautiful paintings that are done loosely, and I've done some as well, but layering is the mark of, I think once you start practicing a lot, if this is your style, of course, it's the mark of improving your skills. Okay, one more over here. And okay, there should be one back there as well, because that's pretty dark. Also, you can take some chances and do some really dark areas. I think that sometimes it works out really well, so don't be afraid to make things a little bit darker in some areas. Your eye is going to register this flower as white, even if you are using those really dark tones. All right, let's do this bud over here. We just need maybe a little bit of a dark shadow down here, maybe something on the inside here and on this edge. All right, we're just continuing to add in darker tones here, where there would be more shadow. Something else you can do too, if you feel that this petal is way too white, you could add a little shadow towards the bottom and just blend it in. You don't have to do that. I really love these magnolia flowers. They're really beautiful. I love it when they start blooming in our neighborhood. They're so pretty, and I've wanted to paint them for so long. Finally doing it today. Okay. Don't worry, guys. We won't layer anymore. but to be honest, I'm probably gonna layer this even more after I'm done with this little tutorial. Okay, we're looking good. Maybe just a little bit right here. All right, now what we need to do is we need to add in the stem, some color in there, because right now they're looking really flat. I'm gonna mix up a brown, kind of golden brown, or not golden, what do you call this? Van Dyke brown, I guess, but kind of muted. And I'm just making a line down the center, or sorry, not down the center, along the side. It does not have to be, it's kind of better if you make it jagged. And I'm going to grab just water. I'm not gonna come all the way to this edge. I'm just gonna lightly soften it, but leaving that the base layer showing. Magnolia stems are really, obviously they're made out of wood, but they're kind of knobby. So I want to reflect that with these. Again, just painting one edge and making sure that I'm leaving that exposed lighter edge. Okay. Lastly, our center areas, mix up a yellow that's a little bit deeper than that yellow that you had originally. I'm gonna come in just one side, and my paint is thick, like butter. Rinse off my brush, grab just water, and slightly blend it in so it starts moving a little bit, but making sure to leave an area that shows just the base layer. And I'm gonna do that on all of these. And we're gonna do 1 or 2 finishing touches. So just the outside and then rinsing off just with water. And if you feel that you need a little bit darker color, make your yellow a little darker and you can just poke that in too. If you want. I want to add one more color variation to the stem. I'm grabbing a pretty dark brown. It's still brown though, it doesn't look black. And just with the tip of my brush, you can use a smaller brush if you need, I'm just gonna make a line. And since it's still wet, it's going to blend pretty easily. Just a line on the outer edge, and I like it because the way it's bleeding, it makes it look knobby, the wood. This one's already dry, so I'm gonna have to help it along a little bit. So just do that technique where you rinse off your brush and grab a little bit of water and then make that swirl motion. Okay, one more over here. This one is not blending either. Okay. Last thing you can do, if you want to add some detail to this center area, you can grab a dark brown, not too dark, kind of a reddish brown. And the center of the Magnolia has, I don't know how to explain it, but it's textured, almost just like these little lines. And it's okay if this is wet, but I'm just making lines going up, kind of with the side of my brush. I'm using a 3/0 brush, so it's really small. It's the Pigeon Letters liner brush. And you don't have to go crazy with these details, just a little bit. And you could totally leave these out too, if you don't want them. I would recommend lightening your paint as you get closer to the top. And you could also wait until it totally dries. I kind of like the look of it blending in a little bit. And you could always come in once it's dry too and add finer details, which I think that you might need a little bit. And that looks great. If you guys want, you can add a darker shadow right underneath where that stamen is, so it really pops. But we're pretty much done. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you could tag me on Instagram at Lavender and C, I love to see what you guys create, and thanks for watching.